Hey guys, this is Nick Sutner. This is going to be the final episode of our Into the Depths series on the music of Mutazione, produced by Deguda Fabrique and hosted by Doug Wilson. After that, we're going to take a few weeks off from the Into the Depths series and coming back with a new one in February, tentatively, with the regular gang. So look forward to that. Next week on the regular Eggplant Show, we're going to be talking to Zelivir Nelson Jr., a writer and narrative director who's worked on games like Hypnospace Outlaw and Reigns Beyond, and upcoming games like Skatebird and An Airport for Aliens currently run by dogs. And he's also announcing a new game between now and that recording, which we're going to be able to talk about. So that should be really cool. And for those who listen to our Game of the Year show, we were actually going to be doing a group watching of De Mol, which was Doug's number one pick. It's a reality show. You can find out more on our Game of the Year show. But we're going to be watching that show as a group, and we're going to be talking about it on our Discord channel, watching one episode a week for the next bunch of weeks until we're through that. So if you haven't yet come join our Discord, it's discord.gg/eggplant. We would love to have you. And yeah, enjoy the finale to the Into the Depths series on the music of Mutazione.
Hello and welcome to The Radio Tower, a four-part podcast about the audio and music design of Mutazione, a narrative adventure game that we released in September 2019. I'm Douglas Wilson, a game designer and audio programmer on Mutazione. I'm joined here by Alessandro Coronas, the audio and music designer on the game.
Ciao.
And Nils Deneken, the creative director, lead visual artist, and the originator of the whole concept for the game.
Hello, happy to be here again.
As I mentioned every episode, we worked on Mutazione for over 10 years on and off with a whole team beyond just the three of us here. So there's no way we can capture the full story of the development on this podcast. Instead, we're going to deep dive into the music of the game, how music initially inspired some of Nils's concepts for the game, how we designed our procedural music system, and what kinds of influences the soundtrack draws from, and much more. We'll also be playing some excerpts of music, including some early concepts and drafts that never made it into the final game. Today, on the final episode, episode 4, we're going to talk about the special music and story music throughout the whole game, as well as some unreleased music sketches. But first, let's all listen to the game's title theme, sung in Italian by Scottish singer Louise Dodds.
Mare
So that was the title theme of Mutazione, the version that made it into the final game, more or less. Can we talk about the influences and the style to kick things off, right? So it has this like very 1960s cinematic pop song kind of vibe to that. How did that influence come about? Like, why that style?
So yeah, the game was always supposed to play all around this kind of. I mean, it's a fantastical universe, so not sure if you have like similar eras or like if you have a 60s in a fictional universe, but it was always supposed to have this kind of 60s 70s vibe from the technology that people would use and the architecture that was in the ruins and stuff like that. So it made a lot of sense to use that kind of style in like the title theme and like in some of the musical direction as well, because it was also in the visual style of the game. And also as a reference to all this, well, the title was Mutazione, and we were not going to change that because nobody came up with a alternative title that was better than that. So like basically taking that title as a consequence for, this being like an Italian word. And then, like sometimes these processes kind of go the other way around that you would expect. You don't have like a whole concept shaped out. It's like one decision, has a consequence later. The same, that happened with the gardens in a way. So you made these intuitive decisions, and then we're like, okay, would be great to have this kind of, if we pair that kind of Italian with the 60s and 70s, where you had really strong cultural influence from Italy, around that time, and the movies, I saw when I was a kid, or the music that was played in Germany where I grew up, there was a lot of Italian influences. So like using that kind of nostalgia from that time and, pair that, felt pretty appealing.
So on German TV, like in terms of European culture, you're saying like specifically there was a heavy amount of Italian culture?
Yeah.
Like on TV.
Really?
I think so. At least stuff also like film Italo Westerns and Bud Spencer and Terence Hill and stuff like that. Everything was obviously synced in German, and they added their own jokes in German and whatever. But the music was always Italian, right? So so that had a strong kind of influence. I don't know, like if I already like analyzed it like that when I kind of went that direction. I think originally I was more looking. there was this Mr. Bongo song which I really loved, "Sweet Charity" from like the last record called California, that also had this like a similar vibe to it. And it was like, I wish Mike Patton had sung that song in Italian. And that would have been such a nice fit. And I remember sending that song to Alessandro at the really early days of Mutazione, a bit like a joke, like, hey, this would be an awesome kind of vibe for an intro song. But then actually we went for this whole idea eventually, because it felt that it actually was a good fit and not just like, yeah.
Alessandro, was that a natural fit for you? Were you like, oh yeah, I know how to compose that? Like, and I guess you must have grown up like seeing a bunch of those kind of cinematic Italian songs. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And I don't know, like it was pretty natural for me. I think it's pretty much like when you're an actor, like you read the screenplay and you want to know as much as possible about the character like that you're about to play, up to the finest detail. And for me, it's I have like a similar natural approach for like music making. So if I have a song that is from the 60s, then I want to be that musician from the 60s. Whether it's like a bass player, or whether it's like a guitar player, or the drums. I would tune the drums like in a certain way. I would just mic the drums in a certain way. I would record from the beginning till the end, instead of having multiple takes and then stitch them into one. It's really easy nowadays, but I didn't want to do that when I recorded this piece. I wanted to feel that thrill of, okay, it's one take, you have to do it right, and if you screw something up, sorry, we have to delete that and just start over. And I don't know, it's just this part of the process which first of all makes the music really believable, and second, for me, it's like, I don't know, it's supernatural. Like I really like it. It's just fun for me to become one of those musicians, say, quote unquote.
But okay, so speaking about the fun aspect, so there's also like definitely a sense of humor. So can you tell us, the lyrics are actually sung by a Scottish singer, your friend Louise Dodds. Can you tell us about that? Like why have this Scottish singer sing in these Italian lyrics?
Yeah, I don't know. For me, the word is exotic. I always thought that Louise singing in Italian was, super exotic for some reason. And, having this slightly off pronunciation was like a super juicy little detail for me. And I've always thought that Nils would have loved it. So, I don't know, Nils, what do you say?
Well, it has this kind of, just because it was like a part of this kind of childhood nostalgia, and and it has this certain, combining that with the 60s and 70s vibes, it had this kind of certain flair, and also it would be very different from like the regular kind of soundtrack or influences that a lot of other games would have. So it was also a way to set it apart, obviously. Combined with the title, which was a good fit, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think what I really like about, and I didn't even fully realize that at the beginning, but that's like almost this meta self-reflection, though, as you as this person sitting in Sardinia, like having fun with having your friends sing these. Like there's something, it's almost this like kind of meta level of reflection on that European nostalgia for Italian film or whatever. Do you feel like she sung the lyrics pretty well?
Oh, totally. Louise is an amazing singer, and we worked together in the past. We're good friends. And I think on this song, she perfectly captured that flavor of Italian 60s pop music. So, she did an amazing job, I think.
Nils, before you settled on this kind of 60s Italian cinematic song vibe, you, if I remember correctly, you had other ideas for what the intro music might sound like?
Yeah, I mean, like there was always a certain amount of doubt involved in this idea, and going back and forth between ideas. So there was another song that I had in my collection from a good friend who had a band called The Good Good, and they had the track list from an old like mix CD from a very early song that was also just like a jam or a sketch or something that I really loved, and I really liked the idea of involving my friends in this project and making it personal, like giving the forum to also people who would make music, which
Yep.
So I played around with that idea, and I actually also contacted them, but my friend David, who was a bass player there, he wasn't involved in that song, so he wasn't able to give me a yes or no if we were able to use it, and I wasn't able to get contact to the old team members, band members. So yeah, that's so I didn't follow up on this idea, and I'm not even sure if I shared that song with Alessandro back then because it didn't become an option. But the direction would have been very, very different. The story it told would have been very different. Not necessarily a worse fit. It would have just, set a different tone from the very beginning.
Okay, so this is the band The Good Good and a track 15 from a mixtape.
really like this song. You never sent this to me. I remember you mentioning that during some meetings. But yeah, I really like the vibe. It has a much darker vibe. And also this atmosphere is so you, Nils. It's just like, it really reminds me a lot of all the mixtapes that we used to listen to in the greenhouse where we're, just chatting. And
Right.
and it has this kind of 70s lo-fi feel, which is, again, like very you for me. Yeah.
I like the song actually, but I really appreciate that there's a level of both cinematic imagination, but also humor. Like, I really like the humor of you refracting the Italian through this other singer that I think strikes like a kind of better tonal balance between, so it's not just like super moody, but fantastical and funny and charming. So I like the way that 60s throwback mixes
Exactly.
all those.
Yeah, it's definitely, that's the difference. Like with the original, like what we went with might be slightly more emotionally detached, but it says something different, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like it has the humor in there, but it has also this this kind of opening where you're entering this, big game, right? This is like, now here we go, right? It's, setting a different kind of sign. Well, this is more introvert, and it's also nice, but it's very, very different in the way like you kind of present yourself, and
I think it's hard. Like, you would worry with a song like this if the game is taking itself too seriously. That's always a really difficult balance to strike. And so, I like that it starts with this very earnest kind of conversation with the mother, and then the friction with Graub. But then the game doesn't take itself too seriously. Like it's like self-aware in a way with I think with the current title theme that I like.
Well, the question is whether that's a good or a bad thing. Like, sometimes this kind of self-aware meta layer, if people kind of as like someone who plays it or watches it, you suddenly take a step back and take a step out of the fiction. So I guess it's this sweet spot between like keeping the balance between like having the player inside the world and the universe. But I think the cool thing is the Italian song does that as well. I think it still keeps you in the universe and in the kind of narrative. It just builds up a different kind of universe than this one, right?
Yep.
Still, I totally love the song. It also reminds me of Riders on the Storm from The Doors, actually.
Yeah. When I was imagining and visualizing the beginning of the game, for me, it was always important, like, to make it heartfelt and meaningful, but not too much. Always like leaving like the handbrake, which is slightly pulled, so you have a bit more.
You might be closer to Kai's emotional state here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, always not to overstate everything at the very beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I imagined her having headphones on, listen to it on a Walkman, and she might have gotten that that tape from a good friend.
Yeah, but also I have to add that I also wanted to keep that kind of lighthearted, like introvert, not that open, but also fun in a way. I don't know if that makes sense, but it was just like combining these three big elements into like the opening of the game, which is really important anyway. So yeah, it was just like using these three different tones combined all together. Yeah.
So let's stick with that tone. And this is something that I like that Alessandro, I think, does like a number of times throughout the game, which is this mix of charmingness and adventure, but also some amount of humor. And so I think another good example of that, also from a boat, is the boat trip that you take in the game on day 3.
5.
So you wake 5. Geez, it's it just shows how much I know about the game I worked on. Day 5, you wake up early and go on this boat trip with Mew and Tung. And let's play not the final version that went into the game, but for fun, let's play an early sketch of the boat trip music, and then we'll talk about it and the influences and where the song finally went. But Alessandro, the song we're about to play, this is the first sketch you ever did for this. Is that right?
Yes, and the audio file is actually extracted from the video mockup that I did for Nils. The very first time I submitted like my first attempt for the boat trip music, and so it also includes the ambience and the boat engine sound to kind of help set the atmosphere so that it would have been easier for him to imagine like the whole scene. So yeah.
Okay, great. So if you've played the game, try to imagine that scene with this music. If you haven't, just imagine these 3 friends on a boat ride through the swamps of Mutazione. All right, boat trip music, version 1. Great. So that was, Alessandro, that was your first sketch of what you had imagined the music might sound like.
Mm-hmm.
Nils, you had like pretty specific influences or like a vision in your head about what this boat trip might sound like. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I was totally inspired by the Monkey Island 2, when you take a rowboat to the Voodoo Lady, and it's a boat trip basically through the swamps, and you end up at the hut of the Voodoo Lady, which is in a tree hut in the swamp. And I love the way, and I'm only referring to like the MIDI version of the music in the very old pixelated game.
Yeah.
I love the way that it builds up there. Like, I love the vibe of it. I mean, like, Monkey Island was generally, I think the soundtrack of Monkey Island must have been extremely influential in a lot of ways on a lot of musicians. Like, the whole kind of, we were talking about this in previous episodes, like this kind of surfy kind of sound, and like the combined with the MIDI instruments, like very limited like instrumentation, obviously, but it gave you this kind of, they really managed to get all the atmosphere and the mood out of these kind of MIDI bleep sounds,
Yep.
which was super amazing and yeah, awe-inspiring. And I love that specific sound. I actually recorded it at some point and put it on a mixtape, which I should have somewhere lying around. Yeah, so I wanted to do a homage to that. So that was a pretty clear statement, I guess.
And was that, did that immediately click, that influence click when Nils told you that, Alessandro, or it took you a while to turn that into the final version?
No, I mean, I grew up with Monkey Island, and it still remains one of the most atmospheric games that I've ever played. And so it was super easy for me to just dive into it. And it's about like going reggae, and then, like add colors and stuff. And it was, for me, it was also like super, super fun because it was such a familiar thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I also love the fact in that boat trip in Monkey Island, it was that the soundscape was building up, like spatially. And I mean, like, Mutazione didn't end up like that anyways, because it did, I guess, because you were changing the scenes, and over those scenes the music would build up. But the way the music, kind of the layers of the music got added on top of each other, the closer you got to your goal. I love that. It's done all the time now in video games, but it was just
Yep.
Yeah, we actually tried it. Remember?
Yeah, we did. We did that. But you couldn't go back and forth, obviously.
Yeah.
We scaled back a little bit. So, Alessandro, from memory, the final implementation of the boat trip is still slightly procedural. Like the engine is playing different layers in combination with each other. But we had done an earlier iteration that was even a little bit more procedural, but then we simplified it down a little bit.
Yeah. Essentially, I had to render all the variations into one single file, because it's a long time question. We cannot control the pace of the dialogue because it's in the hands of the player, so we cannot control the music pace.
Right.
And so I had to just put all those variations into one single file and arrange it as a full song that will cover the boat trip from the beginning to the end.
Right, that'll come up a couple times in this episode, where we were always playing with this tension between the players kind of control the pacing, because when they press the button determines when you like move on to another scene or something. And so that in the scheme of a longer song, that's hard to like necessarily turn on a dime and suddenly change to another part of the song. So we always had to strike that balance of how driven by the player actions is the music versus how more of just a pre-written song structure.
Yeah, and the funny thing is that the actual trip in the game, it's not long enough for you to hear the last two sections. And I remember when you first heard like the OST version, so the full song, you just wrote me on Slack saying like, "Wait, is this a new section? What was that?" And because literally like there was no time to get to the end of the song during the boat trip.
Yeah, that's also why I love listening to the boat trip. Or it's just called The Trip, right? In the original soundtrack, when you listen to it now, just like being able to hear those last parts. It's just really nice and surprising. Just feels really good. If you tested the game so many times and heard the sound, then it's like, whoa, there was a new layer to this. It's really nice.
So let's actually talk about one of the parts that is procedural in the game. So you go on these different adventures in the game. So now I'll actually get this right. On day 3, actually what happens on day 3 is you go into this area outside of the town called the Wilderness, because your friend Mew has a secret swim spot in the ruins, right, of this old society before it was hit by the meteor. And so the soundtrack that plays in the Wilderness is, we talked about it last episode, this like very procedural town music system that we originally designed and then ended up kind of backtracking from a lot. But when you go to the Wilderness, there's something like I looked this up the other day. There's about 104 different music clips of different instruments, and we kind of layer them in every 2 bars in different pretty randomized configurations. But very, very minimal, like usually only 1, 2, or maximum 3 clips at a time. Do you want to tell us about why, Alessandro, some of the idea with the music for the Wilderness?
Yeah. So the Wilderness was the perfect spot to bring some procedurality back into the gameplay music.
Yeah.
And the Wilderness is a beautiful group of scenes. Like, it's a beautiful part of the game world where there's like a lot of implicit brokenness, because everything is abandoned and there's lots of ruins. And this was like a perfect match for the brokenness of a procedural freeform music system. It was just like a no-brainer because we got super nice results right away. It was really easy to adapt. So, but we complicated our lives a little bit more because we added a couple of custom layers to 2 specific scenes at the very far east of the Wilderness. And those were location-based. And we don't have control over the location, say, because the player decides where to go.
Yeah.
And now we got a problem. Like, what if the player steps into a scene with a custom layer, spends 5 seconds, and then goes like, "Oh, shit, I forgot something at Spike's bar," and runs away? What do we do? Do we start the layer? We don't start the layer at all. And it seems like an easy answer, but with procedural music, it's not, because you already have something that's going on and you don't have control over that music. And it's these small decisions, if you nail them, everything sounds even better. But if you just got them slightly, wrong, everything kind of doesn't glue.
Yep.
So let's take a listen to this procedural Wilderness music system so people can get an idea of this sense of brokenness. Let's go. So that mellotron flute you just heard is one of the custom layers that we talked about. That was one of the problematic moments, so to speak, because of the procedurality, you know?
So definitely procedural music when the player can, because our game is not one continuous scene. It's this like almost set of dioramas, like these individual scenes. So that was definitely like a music design logic that we had to play with over the course of the development. So other parts worth talking about of the music, the soundtrack throughout the story mode. There's a whole variety of genres on the original soundtrack. So it's not just this kind of swampy vibe. It's not just this old 1960s vibe. You also like ended up performing as this fictional riot girl punk band. Is that right? Like that's these loud records that Mew ends up listening to in her house at night.
Yeah, but the initial idea, I always loved the idea of having Miyu listening to Renaissance lute solo music at night. And it was like, I always thought it was like a nice contrast between Miyu being a feline, being a hunter, and then when she goes back home, she listens to this really calm, relaxing music. Yeah,
and we had that in the game as well. Like at some point, like in the very first demos, right? We had her listening to that music.
Yeah, echoing in the night, and having Renaissance music echoing in the night of a tropical island is like
wonderful. Yeah, it was like a really wonderful fit.
And you know, like this idea, eventually it would become punk music because I just read this dialogue. I was testing the game and I read this dialogue from you that Hannah wrote, where she mentioned that you would listen to Riot Girl Punk before going for a hunt, because that way the silence of the forest would have been deafening, and I thought it was like a super beautiful contrast.
Right.
And so we switched to punk music from you because I always felt like if we're going to go for this antique music, that's going to be only for one character. Otherwise, it's such a bold choice. It has to happen once in the game. So I actually have a little surprise. I made 5 punk pieces, but only 4 of them made it into the game. And what we're about to hear is the one that I discarded, which is actually one of my favorites as well. But yeah, I don't know, it just didn't make it into the game. And it's called Riot Punk Side A. Nils, I perfectly remember the day I wrote you about this. I remember I went something like, listen, I just played the game and I found this line of Miyu listening to punk music. So can I write some rowdy punk shit for the game? And you said, yeah, why not? You remember that?
Yeah, and it also says something very different about Mew as a character, right? And now you have Yoki playing the harpsichord, so you have the kind of, well, like the Baroque kind of mood, the harpsichord sounding over the the city at night, or the Mutazione at night, and then you have this kind of punk music coming out of Mew's house, which is like a total contrast to what the mood otherwise is from the game. But it's also
Yeah,
really
and
nice.
also think about it. Punk music echoing at night. So also the time of the day matters a lot.
Yeah, poor Nano. Can you imagine that? It's like that music always blaring outside of his house.
Yeah.
In the middle of the night.
Yeah. He wasn't complaining. I'm actually surprised that he wasn't complaining about that.
Maybe the sound insulation is really good.
This reminds me of my landlords. They're pretty old and they live on the top floor. And I play drums. Sometimes I play drums at 10 p.m. because I needed to record something. And they were always like really happy. And I say like, did I bother you? And I said, no, we like it, because we know you're there. And
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great. It's a very good neighbor to have, I think.
It gives a sign of life. There's someone there. And,
Yeah.
I love that moment in the game. I think it was the first time I tested it when actually the music and the sound was in. That was like this mind-blowing experience where just things came together. And then going to Mew's house, listening to punk rock music with her. And then you would leave the house and go down to Tree Square, and then the night music would kick in, and this kind of the contrast between like that ride punk and the night music was just so sweet. It's like suddenly like the night would open up to you. It's just really magical. So I love that.
So, but that's not the only band music that you composed for the game. So can we talk about the band night at the end, this end of day 5, this big dramatic moment? So there's a whole kind of story that leads up to the final sketch. The final version, that's you that composed that band song, right, Alessandro?
Yes, correct.
And tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll work our way backwards. So that's your friend Laura singing, is that right?
On the very first sketch was Laura. Yeah.
I think the last one, that was Sylvia.
Exactly, Sylvia.
Oh, okay. So the last one is... and there are some lyrics in English, though, right?
You mean from the final piece with Sylvia, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Those were words written on this piece of paper that I had on the wall. And since 2015, it's been there like for the past 4 years. And those were like the titles for each day so that I could remember what each day was all about. So the day of the ritual had day 5 and then ritual. Yeah.
So you two saw that note and then just kind of this word ritual and then just started screaming that as part of the song.
Yeah, it was ritual. It was Black Day. What else? Oh my God.
Day off.
It was day off. And yeah, that was it.
Yeah, day off came before ritual. So like day off was day 5, and then the ritual day was the day afterwards.
Right. But it took you a while, and so that came pretty late. Like that was made in 2019, pretty close to like finalizing all the content. Much earlier on, like in the early days, there was some thought that the band. So we knew that there was going to be this band sequence, but we thought, so Nils, you're actually in a band, and we thought that we might actually use your band, like kind of amateur level band being this town band, right?
And that was never that was not the original plan. Like we wanted because we wanted to have this town with all these characters and then the bar, and there was a stage in the bar. So it made sense that there would there would be a band playing there. And I'm really a big fan of like fictional bands, basically. I mean, I totally loved the ideas of Gorillaz when that came out. Like there was like this kind of fictional band that would, sell records, and they would build this whole universe around this band, this fictional universe. And they could have done that much more consequential than they did in the end. With, Damon Albarn could have taken a step back and just let the fiction talk by itself. But I love the idea of like the potential of that. And also, like when Alessandro, he came, he showed me the Animal Crossing soundtrack back then, which had the one of the characters playing in the cafe each Thursday. So like there was also something that, sounded very appealing. Like, okay, that would be so awesome. You would have this, the concept for the game was slightly different, was more like more procedural back then, also in terms of storytelling. So you would have like this place where there would be a band playing and certain, evenings, which you could go to and witness their concert. And yeah, the whole idea was basically also, again, we really wanted to have that, but we didn't really think about the consequences of it, because it was like quite of a big effort. Well, the consequences got more severe when I wasn't super happy with Alessandro's original sketch, and then I showed him at some point some jam sessions that we did with the band I was playing in, and that was just a band for fun, right? We just recorded our jam sessions, had no plans with the music. That was basically it. And but Alessandro really liked one of those sketches, so yeah, we tried to polish that and make that into a song that would actually go into the game. And I made that mistake of involving my friends in my free time project, which was like, that was supposed to be my free time, right, where I could just totally relax and don't have to think about work. And I made that my work at that point, right? Which was just like the biggest mistake, because suddenly, this really nice sketch that we made, which I really loved, we tried to work with that, but we weren't like the feel and the easiness that was in the original jam just got lost. And in the end, when we, after a year of work or something, where we tried to polish that thing and give it a structure, give it a metronome click so we could animate on it. We went back to Alessandro with it, and he was like, nah.
Yeah, I actually liked it.
Yeah,
but still, we needed something a bit more poppy.
Yeah, and I get it. I totally get it, because we polished that song so much, it just basically lost its soul. There were all kinds of issues with it. We needed Alessandro to put vocals on top of that and stuff like that. So he basically just said, "No, it. I'm just going to do the thing from scratch. I'm just going to use the same kind of rhythm," because we already had animations for it. So I used the structure of the song, but made a new song, which is like super fresh and nice and totally hit the right note. So
can we listen
no
to
regrets.
Can we listen to excerpts first from Alessandro's original band sketch, which has Lara singing on it, and then we'll listen to an excerpt from Nils's band, some of the original sketch, and then so here is Band Stomp Long.
Nils, like one of the things that I struggled a lot for months was what kind of voice we should give Miyu when she sings. Because chronologically, this happens day 5. And by day 5, the players are super accustomed with Miyu's clickety-clackety, like, conversation sounds.
Right. That was also definitely a break.
Yeah, because, I mean, think about it, like, the gap between those super abstract conversation sounds and a real female voice is huge.
Yep.
And so I knew that I needed to find like that sweet spot. But I also knew that that sweet spot was awfully narrow and tiny. And when I invited her to record some stuff for the game, she replied, yeah, but I am not a singer. And I said, like, yeah, just write because you're not a singer. So please come. And Sylvia, she's like a tall girl. She's a big girl. She's taller than me, and her voice is kind of lowish. But for whatever reason, after I pressed record, like she started singing with this super high-pitched voice, super girly teenagey, that was also super J-pop for me. So it was super inspiring, and it was like, what is that? That is amazing. And I knew that thanks to her, like, we hit that sweet spot right away, and that was a huge relief for me because it was, again, like a long time question.
Yeah, totally different outcome from like, the way Maya was singing, but also the way that Laura was singing, right? Like, so like 3 very different versions of what Miyu could sound like. But yeah.
There was this other thing that I think was a songwriting challenge for you, where we don't know when the player is going to end the scene. So there was this question, which is like, okay, well, is this just like a 7-minute .wave file that just suddenly ends and then you stop the band? Or can we figure out a way to keep it going infinitely? So in the final version in the game, there's this like big, 5-minute intro section that plays just once, and then a smaller section, like instrumental section, that loops infinitely after that. Is that correct?
Yeah,
it's like this everlasting outro if you play it, right?
Yeah, and the problem there was that the whole moment, it was a really special moment, and it was paced by the conversation, aka was paced by the player. And remember, it was tricky. It was like a mind for me because I had to find like a seamless transition from like full-on live performance piece to this hybrid, wherever that was, infinite loop, and it wasn't really easy by any means.
We basically invited, this world of pain into a project.
Exactly,
I mean, like, we did that on so many levels, but with the band, it was a special kind of self-torture, like making it work. Like, the idea was great, having a band play and like super charming, but like how to actually pull this off in a meaningful way.
Right, because you also had to sync it with existing animations, and like there were just like a lot of constraints.
We fucked the whole pipeline of doing this, because we were assuming we would take this one song and then we made a working sketch for the animator for it, because they were on time pressure. It needed to get done, stuff needed to get animated, so we had it animated, and then we found out that we couldn't use the song, but then there was the whole challenge of making it, like, how to structure it within the story and within the gameplay of the game. Were you able, like, all these questions, were you able to hear the song outside of the bar, and then we were like, at this point everyone was stressed out in the project, and there were so many there were so many things that needed to be built, and so many much more important things that needed to work, right? So like all these ideas we had about how the music would work, like, didn't go very well with the programmers, because they would have required like a lot of extra hours from their side, and a lot of like building these extra features into the sound engine and stuff like that. So yeah, we needed to really just make it work on the most simple level. So that's why, in the end, we locked the player in the bar, and they had to play this kind of play through these dialogues, and then this event would happen, which I'm not going to spoil. But yeah, it was complicated.
Yeah, most of my effort doing the music programming, because we left so much of the story music till the very end. It's amazing how quickly so much of the game just came together under time pressure at the end. But a lot of the work I was doing at the very end of the project was just writing really hacky special case code that didn't always jive well with my original assumptions about the music engine. Because when you write this kind of code, you always do a prototype, and then you learn some new features that it needs. So you write it from scratch, rewrite it, knowing, okay, this time I need to take into account this set of timings and this way that it works with the animations or whatever. But I didn't have that kind of time to rewrite it from scratch. So there was just me and Alessandro figuring out the lowest effort ways to hack in ways for it to okay, so when you talk to Graubert and that interrupts the music, and there's this change of scenes, what's the most graceful way to suddenly stop the band music and make it feel like the music's been interrupted? And so there was just a ton of time that went into figuring out these details as quickly and as messily as possible.
Yeah, I remember we were chatting, it was the very last week or even the last evening of we were able to change things and making requests for the programmers, or there was this feature stop, and we're trying to make this band scene work and make it stop. And I was trying all kinds of things. Also, the syncing with the animation was really difficult.
Yeah.
And, I was sitting with Morten and splitting up the animations again. And all these things happening at the same time to just make this stupid band song work. Right? You just wish you never had put a stage into that bar in the first place. But it's also there was so many fuck-ups in terms of the way we planned this, right? I mean, and there's so much music in this project, and there's the guns and the town music, and we were just very, very ambitious in terms of every part of the music in the game.
So speaking of technical constraints, can we talk about the Big Fung music? Because we have an old sketch from Alessandro that I think we were excited about that had to be pretty heavily modified into the version that the game shipped with because of a lot of technical and design constraints around how that. So at the end of the game, without spoiling too much, there's this big important story sequence when you go into this mushroom cave that has a lot of work that went into these animations and cutscenes that happen that kind of hint at a bunch of story things. Can we play, Alessandro, this old sketch that you originally wrote that you imagined for this scene?
Yeah, still remains my favorite.
So here we go. It's titled Big Fung Choir Original. So that sketch has this very kind of controlled build up that then ends in this special moment. And you were doing this sketch with the video. Is that right, Alessandro?
Yep.
But the issue is that whole scene is built up of like a few little cutscenes that you're loading between. And one of the issues is obviously some computers are faster than others.
Yeah.
So we couldn't guarantee the amount of loading time between, because you're seeing during this cutscene, you're seeing different places from the world of Mutazione. And so obviously you have to do like a scene load in order to show each new place. But that now has a variable length of time, because for you, it might take 0.25 seconds to load. But on somebody on a slower computer, maybe it takes a full second to load. And so then you lose all the exact precise timings if you want to really sync every image that flashes with like the beat of the music. So that became this like really big intractable problem. I think at some point, Alessandro, you were asking, well, can we just play a video of these scenes? So that we can sync it up exactly. But it was like way too late in the tech pipeline to consider something like that. So we needed to go for a solution, which is the one that's in the final game, that could account for some amount of variability. But then obviously you lose the ability to like fully sync it, like each image change to a beat or something.
I actually have a clear snapshot of that meeting where we decided, okay, we're not going to have control over the timing. And it was okay, you know, because like game development so often challenges you with, you know, limitations, restrictions, and you deal with it. But after I closed the call, I remember like my life kind of froze for 5 seconds, because I was, okay, right, no timing. But how the fuck am I going to do this? 'Cause I was clueless. Because in order to build a ramp up, you need control over the timing. But I would eventually come up with that idea to recreate this ramp up by adding a huge tail at the end of each specific clip from each scene, so that it was so long that they would eventually like stack up.
Yeah.
Like the sound from scene number 1, it was still playing when the scene number 6 would be triggered. So it was this idea of like recreating like a ramp up by stacking up like these long tails. And that worked, you know, and it's funny to realize how your creativity, like when it's choked by restrictions, it kind of sneaks in between restrictions and just finds another way to do some really custom solutions that you would probably never think about.
Yeah, so there's a lot of custom code that goes into the Dream music. And you know, we spent a lot of times in these like Unity prefabs that I'd set up in the inspector, where we're like exactly timing, okay, like wait until this moment in the story editor to play this clip, okay, and then when this next scene comes, you should play this sound effect. So it was very like kind of labor intensive to like, and I'm sure if I could go back in time, I could find a much smoother way to organize that, like matching story happenings on screen to what's happening in the audio. But this was all just because we were behind and racing to hit this deadline. Just doing this as messy as possible.
I'm really thankful that we were able to do those dream sequences, because that wasn't really clear at some point either, if we were able to do this. And I was really trying to push for it. And the tool that we got then from like that Morton build, I think it worked super well. It was a very simple tool. Like you were able to do all these things with scene changes and timings and stuff like that. And it would all work through this story editor as well, which we used to write dialogues. And it was very rudimentary, but it did its job to basically do what we wanted. But maybe on this audio level, it was like even more like complicated. I know you would call out these events and stuff like that, which you could put into the game. And I would do the same with like animation sequences or other stuff that got triggered.
Well,
But you could use it for all kinds of things, and we ended up using that in the band stuff for the band stuff as well.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it showed itself to be quite versatile, which was great.
And a lot, by the way, a lot of that is like totally my fault. I mean, I'm still kind of amazed that my like awful janky audio code is like now on Apple Arcade and PlayStation 4 and all like this. You know, doing a project of this size as a programmer because on Sports Friends, the PlayStation 3, 4 game I had worked on earlier, I had written my own prototype, but I wasn't one of the primary programmers on that project. So I definitely learned a lot about software engineering. So there's things that I feel very bad that I put Alessandro through with us like hand assembling all these timings for all these dream sequences. But yeah, no, for sure. That was a big technical constraint that ended up changing kind of how the music sounds and that big climax, that big funk sequence. Alessandro, so the kind of the music direction of that scene, you were saying that's pretty inspired by some anime films like Ghost in the Shell. Is that right?
Well, specifically by Akira, because I've never watched Ghost in the Shell. Is Oscar one of the programmers that mentioned that, oh, this reminds me of Ghost in the Shell? And
okay.
he pointed me to a YouTube video of one specific piece, and I realized, oh yeah, actually they sound pretty similar. They have a similar vibe, but Akira for me Akira is one of the most beautiful things that I've ever seen in my life, like as a human expression. And even if it's like, I think more than 30 years old, it still feels like super fresh. I don't know. It's just like an amazing piece of work, I think. Yeah.
I have to confess, I was very influenced by Akira with a lot of stuff. Like when I was a teenager, I loved the comics a lot, and like I loved the pacing of them.
Yeah, you and millions of other people, right?
Right.
It's such this influential piece of work. And no, for sure, I think that was, especially when you think about like ruined society and these like buildings that have been destroyed. You definitely think of a movie like Akira. You know, I think one thing that was also like a tricky conversation during this, which is like, what's the line between like ripping off an influence or being culturally insensitive versus like paying homage to this piece of culture that's really influential to you. So, you know, especially because there's themes of like colonialism and critiquing that within the game, you know, we wanted to avoid like, you know, necessarily like, oh, here's a fake Japanese that we're making fun of, or here there's kind of like Orientalism. So that I know Alessandro worked on that. So if you compare that original sketch to kind of what's finally in the game, we definitely tried to massage that. So to really make it this less like of a one-dimensional cultural appropriation of anime or something, but blending in like all of Alessandro's influences to give that wink and nod to Akira, which I definitely think influences the game in a whole number of different ways, the art, the sound, and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, my intention with this piece was to celebrate the Japanese culture, because Japanese culture has been like a huge inspiration throughout my life. Because I grew up with it. So, and on the other hand, like I always favor like the Japanese way to kind of bring grandness and lyricism to a special moment in the story, as opposed to the Westernish, quote unquote, way, where for me is always a little bit too much in your face, a little bit too obvious. And so because we needed to go grand and, you know, be lyrical in this moment. And my intention was just to keep it like implicit and kind of fold it in. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I got goosebumps when I listened to that sketch, and that because you feel that kind of, oh, this is like building up to this, resolution of this game, right? And this is something you've been working towards and kind of releasing. It feels much more liberating than. I think what you hear a lot of, like with Hollywood movies, that the music is like, um, you kind of, it's suffocating in some ways, like the way
Yeah.
those climax scenes or those liberating scenes, where you can't feel different than what the music tells you to do, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I think here you have a
Mm.
different sense of wonder somehow. Maybe it's also because it hasn't been so used up.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally agree.
Yeah.
You basically have more emotional space
Right.
to make it your own.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a few final things before we wrap up. I wanted to play an unreleased piece of music. Speaking of dream sequences, so there were a lot of iterations and concepts about what should these dreams, because it's not just that big sequence at the end. Throughout the game, Kai, when she goes to sleep, there's like about 3 times in the game that she has these strange dreams, and we knew we wanted to make that sound really special and memorable. So, can we play this unused draft called "Dream to China Gates"? And Alessandro, that's a reference to a famous American classical composer, John Adams, and a piano piece called China Gates.
Yep.
So this was like a sketch of how the dreams might sound. Let's listen to this.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah, I totally loved it. I think the problem was that at that point the dream sequences were already planned out and sketched out, and we had the storyboards for it, and I had a clear idea of what the mood of them was supposed to be, and that was just not
Yeah.
hitting that, because the dream sequences were like they had this kind of spirit guide in there called Kuru, which was this kind of more ambivalent and dark creature. And like when I listen to the sketch, I get a very different image in terms of the environment, the landscape.
Yeah.
To me, it feels much more open and dreamy in a very different and much more positive kind of way.
Yeah.
Where the dream sequences in Mutazione often felt more closed in, apart from the one where we use the analog synth with the Cloud Island that could have been a nice fit, but there definitely want to have this kind of analog synth radio signal kind of analogy. So yeah, unfortunately, this couldn't make it. It's a really beautiful piece. I should have heard that as an inspiration before I went on concepting those seeds. It might have become different.
Man, it's a real shame too, because Alessandro, that wasn't just meant to be like a dot wave file. Like we had a whole procedural system about how we were going to like layer the individual piano layers in like a semi-randomized way.
Yeah, what you just heard is the way I placed each musical clip in Logic Pro. And as I was placing them, I was already sketching the rules, the musical rules for you. And so everything was ready, and I was ready to go, and I was super eager to do that.
I remember having those conversations with you. Like I was already thinking about how I was going to program it.
Such a shame. Yeah,
and I knew that you would have loved this John Adams homage.
Oh yeah, I'm a huge
more than Nils.
I'm a huge John Adams fan. Yeah, it's one of my favorite composers. So I immediately was so excited. We should definitely use that system in like another game, Alessandro.
Yeah,
because it's
either that or Mutazione 2.
That's right. Or hire us at DougandAlessandro.com. That's not a real website. Okay, so another piece of unused music that I felt like we had to mention before we end this series. I think one of my biggest regrets about the audio design and working on the design of this game is not putting in this piece of music that I love. This was, Alessandro, can you tell us about this treetop reward music?
I would actually pass this to Nils first, because he had a wonderful idea that unfortunately didn't make it into the game. And then I'll chime in after you, Nils.
Well, I wanted to have the treetop. I wanted you to be able to climb all the way up to the treetop and get a really nice look of the whole area, the whole bay, and the kind of the ruined city and the jungle beneath you. But like, again, time pressure. We had to make really, really serious cuts at some point. And this was one of the things that didn't serve any purpose beside, being this reward of, going up to the treetop and getting a view of the area. And it would have, if you wanted to make this work, you would have had to put so much care and love into that scene. You would have had all these different cloud formations and the light changing. There would have been, you needed enough detail to be interesting, and it would have had to be nice in all kinds of different weathers and times of days, and that was time we didn't have anymore. So yeah, regrettably that needed to go.
Remember the implementation of this piece was tied to a feature that we had to scrap because of pure time constraints.
Yeah.
And there was the possibility for Kai to simply sit like at some, specific special spots. And the treetop was the one that you proposed first. And you would have worked this way. You would sit on the treetop for long enough, and the town music will start fading out, and that would have been a hint for the player because something is about to happen, because town music is supposed to play if you're in the village. And after say probably 20 seconds of silence, the treetop music would have been triggered, and I already knew that it would have been super rewarding. Yeah, but
Let's take a listen, though, just so you can imagine what could have been. Treetop reward music. Let's listen to an excerpt. Yes, so good.
It's really nice. But I mean, like, you realize that, like, because the music is setting up so high expectations, like having to draw that scene at a spot where, like, there really wasn't any time for it. It's horrible. I would have loved to draw that scene.
Yeah. I've always imagined like this moment as a moment of almost decompression, like, you know, from everything that was going on in the game. The story, the connections, the characters, their issues, your issues as Kai, and just go up there and literally stop playing and just be there on top of that tree, just getting lost in thoughts. Yeah, I promise I will release this at some point.
Yeah, it's and Alessandro, I guess you'll put this on the collection of unused music.
Yeah.
It is one of my favorite unused sketches that didn't go into the game, which is sad. But you really feel that Boards of Canada vibe, and they were quite famous for certain like harmonic progressions that would appear in a lot of Boards of Canada songs. So I think that was a really nice like musical wink for sure to that influence. But maybe we won't spoil all the magic. There are some Easter eggs that actually did make it into the game. Do you want to give a little hint about that, Alessandro?
Okay, in the game world, go to a place where you can meditate and stay there. That's all that I can say.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Finally, let's wrap this up chronologically as we should and talk about the credits music, the music that plays at the end of the story part of the game. And this is also a thing that came together that was finalized at least pretty last minute. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Alessandro?
Yeah, it was super last minute. And I've always had the idea to end the game the same way we started the game, musically, with this tropical 60s pop music. And because I had another piece sung by Louise, which is much more mellow and slow. And so I always thought like it was, this could be a perfect fit for the ending. But Nils, over to you, because you wanted to something way, way more poppy. So
yeah, we needed to finish the game with a bang. We needed to make like also give the player a clear cue to bam, this is it, this is the end of the game, this was your experience, we're going to leave you with that. So that's why I think the original sketch was a bit too mellow, or a bit like too undecisive. Not telling you, like, not really releasing you from the game. And for me, that, you know, making this kind of clear cut was important.
I really love how it ended up. And we'll play the song for you in just a few moments. But starting with that punk part that recalls obviously listening to records in Muse House, but then moving slowly, there's this transition section back into the 1960s cinematic Italian pop. And that, Alessandro, I remember telling you it was like very Led Zeppelin-y in a way, the way you do that transition almost between genres, and also feels like when you watch a Hollywood movie, in the credit sequence at the end, you get this medley of different songs from the game. And so, yeah, something felt like perfectly cinematic about it that I really appreciated. So good work, Alessandro.
Thank you, Douglas.
So let's end it there. Thank you two for taking all of this time to kind of recount this history.
Thank you for hosting this. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Being a part of
Yeah,
this.
for sure.
Super fun.
So we'll leave you with the Mutazione credits music.